The legend of the blade, the planet Talor, was older than any history book could tell. Its skies were always a deep shade of violet, and its mountains rose like jagged teeth against the stars. Strange forests glowed in the dark with colors no human eyes had ever seen before, and deep in the center of the land stood a temple so ancient that even the oldest alien elders whispered its name with fear. The Temple of Karain. It was said the temple was not built by the people of Talor, nor by any race known in the galaxy. It had been here since before the first alien kingdoms rose. Its stone was black as midnight, smooth as glass, and impossible to break. At the heart of this temple rested the blade of Karain. The sword was massive, taller than any alien warrior, its blade shining faintly like frozen silver. It was stuck deep into a block of black stone, as if the rock itself had swallowed it halfway. No one could lift it. For centuries, countless champions had tried. Warlords, generals, heroes, even great kings and queens from distant worlds had journeyed here. They came in their finest armor, with their strongest arms. They gripped the hilt with all their might. They pulled until their bones ached and their muscles tore. But the blade never moved, not even a single inch. The legend said that the blade of Karain was alive, not alive like a person or an animal, but in some other strange way. It could feel the heart of whoever touched it. It could see into their soul, and it would only rise for the one it chose. That chosen one, the old stories claimed, would rule the stars. They would have the strength to protect worlds, the courage to face any enemy, and the wisdom to unite all people. But the years passed. The centuries turned into nearly 1,000 years, and the sword never moved. The people began to believe no one was worthy. Some said the legend was false, just a tale to keep young warriors dreaming. Others believed it was a curse, that the sword's true master had died long ago, and it would never be lifted again. Still, the temple became a place of pilgrimage. Aliens from across the galaxy traveled there just to see the blade. They would stand in the great hall of the temple, looking at the silver hilt with a strange mix of awe and fear. Some would try to lift it, hoping they would be the one to break history. They always failed, and every failure only made the legend stronger. There were many stories about what happened to those who touched the sword. Some said they walked away perfectly fine. Others whispered that a few had gone mad, hearing voices they could not understand. Some swore that the sword rejected the unworthy by showing them their deepest fears. A test so terrible that even the bravest warriors dropped the hilt and fled. The elders of Talor guarded the temple. They kept the peace, making sure no one damaged the ancient hall. They wore long robes of black and silver, and their faces were always hidden behind smooth metal masks. To outsiders, they looked like statues come to life. They spoke rarely, but when they did, their voices were deep and hollow. They would tell the story of the first time the blade appeared, long ago, before Talor's cities were built. A fire fell from the sky. When the people went to see where it had landed, they found the temple standing in the middle of a burning crater. No one knew who had built it. Inside the temple, in the same place it still stood now, was the blade of Karain. From that day, the sword became the center of every story, every prophecy. Some believed it had been left by the gods. Others believed it was a weapon from an ancient war that had ended before time began. But there was one part of the legend that everyone knew. When the blade rises, the stars will follow its master. No one knew what that meant. Was it power? Destiny? War? It was a mystery no one could solve, because the sword refused every hand that tried to claim it. On the day this story truly began, the temple was as silent as it had been for years. The guards stood at their posts, watching, as another group of hopeful challengers came forward. There were 4 of them, tall alien warriors with skin like polished stone, each wearing golden armor. They were champions from the planet Vrinder, known for their unmatched strength. They had crossed light years just to prove themselves. The first stepped forward, his muscles bulged, his hands wrapped around the glowing hilt. He pulled with all his strength. The sound of his armor straining filled the hall, but the sword did not move. His teeth clenched, his arm shook, but still. The blade stayed locked in the black stone. After a long moment, he let go, his eyes full of shame. The second tried next. She was smaller but faster, her movements sharp and precise. She gripped the hilt, pulling again and again. Her speed turned into desperation. But still, nothing. Her eyes narrowed, and she stepped back. Her pride wounded. The third and fourth failed as well. They left the temple with their heads lowered. The crowd outside murmured, shaking their heads. No one had expected them to succeed. The blade had refused warriors far greater than these. And so the day went on, visitors came. Visitors left. The sword stood in its place, unmoving as always, but in the far distance, above the violet skies of Talor, a strange object entered the atmosphere. It was not a comet, not a meteor. It was a ship, small, fast, shaped like a silver arrow. It cut through the clouds and landed on the edge of the alien city. The people gathered, curious. It had been years since an outsider from a distant system had come alone. When the ship's door opened, a single figure stepped out. He was not tall compared to the alien warriors. His body was covered in a simple travel suit. His skin was pale. Compared to the deep colors of the Talor natives, his eyes were sharp, scanning everything with quiet interest. A human few on Talor had ever seen one before. They whispered among themselves. Humans were said to be weak compared to most galactic species, small, fragile, not built for the crushing gravity or harsh climates of many worlds, and yet, they were also known for something else. They never stopped trying, even when they were outmatched. They fought, even when they were beaten. They came back. Some called it stubbornness. Others called it courage. The human introduced himself as Captain Elias Ward. He had traveled alone from the outer systems, following stories of lost relics and ancient worlds. When he heard the whispers about the Blade of Charon, he was curious, not because he believed the legends, but because he wanted to see if it was real. The aliens laughed when he asked to see the sword. Some mocked him openly. What makes you think a human could lift it? One asked, do you even know how many champions have failed? Another sneered. Elias only smiled. I don't, he said, but I'd like to meet it anyway. And so, the next morning, with the sun casting golden light through the temple's broken roof, Elias Ward stepped inside. The crowd followed, eager to see him fail. The guards watched silently, their masked faces unreadable. The air was cold, carrying the faint hum of something ancient and powerful. There, in the center of the hall, stood the Blade of Charon, waiting. Arrival of the human. The massive doors of the Temple of Charon groaned as they closed behind the last failed challenger. The sound echoed through the wide stone hall like the final note of a funeral drum. Outside, the alien crowd was already beginning to drift away. For them, this had been nothing new. Another day. Another group of warriors failing to move the blade. The legend lived on, untouched. But far above Talor's violet clouds, the silver arrow-shaped ship cut through the upper atmosphere. Its engines burned with a soft blue light, its hull carrying the marks of many journeys. Inside the cockpit sat Captain Elias Ward, a man who had been traveling alone for months. His dark hair was tied back loosely, his face calm but alert. He had seen many worlds, heard many stories, but the tale of the Blade of Charon had reached him in whispers. At first, he had dismissed it, just another myth to keep alien children dreaming. But the more he heard, the more the story refused to leave his mind. It was not the promise of ruling the stars that drew him. It was the question, why had no one ever succeeded? The ship touched down at the edge of Vathran, the sprawling city nearest to the temple. Its tall crystal spires shimmered in the alien sunlight, their surfaces reflecting waves of color. The streets were alive with movement, traders calling out their wares, strange beasts pulling carts, metallic drones humming overhead. Everywhere, the people of Talor moved with purpose. Their skin ranged from deep blue to shimmering gold. their eyes glowing faintly in shades of silver and green. They turned to stare as Elias stepped down from the ramp of his ship. He was shorter, lighter, and far less imposing than the alien warriors they knew. Some tilted their heads in curiosity. Others smirked. A few muttered to each other in their own language, words he couldn't understand but whose meaning was clear: disbelief. The first to approach him was a merchant, a tall alien with a crest of bone ridges along his head. "You are not from here," the merchant said in accented Galactic standard. Elias smiled politely. "No, I'm just passing through. You'll find little for your kind in Vathran," the merchant replied, glancing at the human's light travel gear. "Our markets are for warriors and traders, not wanderers." Elias only shrugged. "I'm looking for the temple," the merchant's eyes widened, then narrowed. "The Temple of Karun? You seek the blade?" "I seek to see it," Elias answered simply within minutes. His question had spread. The news traveled fast through the streets. A human wanted to stand before the blade. Small groups began to follow him as he made his way deeper into the city. Some were curious, others amused. The laughter of a group of armored soldiers echoed from a balcony above. One called down, "Careful, human. The blade might snap you in half before you even touch it." Elias glanced up at them with a half-smile. "I'll keep that in mind." At the far end of the city, the temple rose like a mountain of black stone. Its entrance was guarded by 4 tall figures in silver and black robes, their faces hidden behind polished metal masks. They stood as still as statues as Elias approached. The crowd following him stopped at the edge of the wide staircase leading up to the entrance. Only the worthy were allowed inside, or those who believed themselves to be. The lead guardian stepped forward. His voice was deep and hollow beneath the mask. "State your purpose." "I wish to see the blade," Elias said. "And why?" the guardian asked. "Because I've heard it cannot be lifted," Elias replied. "I'd like to find out for myself." There was a pause, then a faint metallic laugh from the guardian. "Another dreamer," he said, stepping aside. "Enter and be judged." Inside, the air was cooler, carrying the faint scent of old stone and something stranger, a metallic tang, almost like the air before a lightning storm. The hall was vast, the ceiling lost in shadow. Tall columns lined the walls, carved with alien symbols that pulsed faintly with light. In the center, bathed in a beam of golden sunlight streaming from a hole in the ceiling, stood the blade of Karun. It was more magnificent than any description Elias had heard. The silver of the blade seemed alive, shifting faintly as though it was made of light instead of metal. The black stone that held it was smooth and flawless. Absorbing the light around it, Elias walked slowly toward it, each footstep echoing in the silence from the edges of the hall. Other visitors watched, alien nobles in flowing robes, armored warriors, travelers from distant worlds. They had come not to try themselves, but to witness this strange human's inevitable failure. A whisper moved through the crowd. Some said he would not last a moment. Others wondered if perhaps his small human hands would tremble before he even touched the hilt. But Elias's eyes were fixed on the sword. It was not arrogance that drove him forward. It was the same feeling that had carried him across 100 dangerous worlds: curiosity. As he drew closer, he felt something strange, the air around the blade seemed heavier, charged. His heart began to beat faster. It was as if the sword was aware of him, as if it was watching. He stopped just a few steps away, studying it. The alien symbols carved into the hilt seemed to shift when he looked directly at them. Not moving, exactly, but changing, for a moment. He thought he saw a pattern, like the shapes of constellations. He reached out a hand, stopping just short of touching the cool silver. The hall was silent now. Every eye was on him, and in that silence, Elias Ward smiled faintly. "Let's see what you have to say," he whispered, and closed his fingers around the hilt. First sight of the blade. The hilt was cold, far colder than Elias expected. Not the normal cold of metal left in shadow, but a deeper, almost unnatural chill. It bit into his fingers as though it wanted to see how long he could endure. The surface was smooth yet strangely alive beneath his touch, as if it was not truly solid, but something shifting between matter and light. He didn't pull right away. Instead, he let his eyes travel up the sword. The blade itself rose higher than his head, its silver surface catching the sunlight from the temple's broken ceiling. It reflected the light in thin lines that danced across the black stone floor. Strangely, those lines formed patterns, twisting shapes like maps of star systems. He blinked, and the patterns shifted again. It was like the sword was showing him something, but too quickly for him to understand. Around the edges of the great hall, the gathered aliens whispered in hushed tones. The sound was like 1,000 dry leaves rustling. Some were amused, some were curious, a few, the oldest and wisest, were silent, watching with the stillness of hunters. Elias could feel their eyes on him. He could almost taste their disbelief. It was heavy in the air, mixing with the electric hum that seemed to radiate from the blade. That hum was faint at first, but as he stood there, it grew, not in volume, but in presence. It wasn't a sound that filled the ears. It was a sound that filled the chest. It made the air feel thicker, harder to breathe. He took a slow breath, his fingers tightening around the hilt. He didn't care about their whispers. He didn't care about the odds. He was here for one thing: to try. The guardians of the temple stood like shadows along the far walls, their faces hidden, their silver masks unreadable. But behind those masks, they were watching closely. They had seen thousands attempt the same thing, but there was something about the human, a steadiness in the way he stood. He was not trembling, not hesitating. That was unusual. Elias shifted his stance, his boots pressed firmly against the cold black floor. One hand gripped the hilt just below the crossguard, the other wrapped over the first. He could feel the faint carvings beneath his palms, symbols older than Talor itself. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a thought formed. I've seen these before, but he had no memory of where. He pulled. It wasn't a desperate yank like the warriors before him. It was slow, deliberate. He wanted to feel every bit of resistance, every detail of what the sword would do. At first, it didn't move, not even a fraction. The cold of the hilt deepened, biting into his skin like frost. The hum grew sharper, a faint vibration running through his arms, and then something strange happened. The air around him seemed to fade. The whispers of the crowd disappeared. The vast temple, the sunlight, the cold stone, all of it dissolved into a black void. He was standing in nothing. No floor, no ceiling, no walls. Only the sword remained, glowing faintly in the dark. A voice spoke. But it wasn't a sound he heard with his ears. It was inside his mind, deep and clear. Strength alone means nothing, it said. Show me your heart. Images burst into his mind. Flashes of earth. Not the earth of now, but moments from his own life. A younger Elias on a broken street, helping someone stand after a fight. The crew he once served with, faces tired but determined. The memory of a promise he had made long ago, when he had never broken. The voice came again. You are not the first human to touch me. That made him pause. But you may be the first to understand. The void faded. The temple rushed back into existence. The crowd's whispers returned, though they sounded distant. His hands were still gripping the hilt, and now the blade trembled. Gasps filled the hall. The black stone around the base of the sword cracked, tiny lines splitting outward. A thin beam of light escaped from the gap. It was faint, but it was enough to send a ripple of shock through the audience. No alien in recorded history had ever made the blade move, not even this much. Elias felt his heart pound. His grip tightened. The sword was heavy, impossibly heavy. Not in the way a piece of metal was heavy. It was as if he was holding the weight of an entire world. He pulled again, harder this time. The cracks in the stone deepened. The hum grew louder, echoing in his bones. And somewhere deep within the sword, something seemed to wake up. The sound grew inside the temple, not from the crowd, not from the stone. It came from the blade itself, a deep, resonating hum that seemed to echo through the bones of everyone in the hall. It was not loud, but it carried a weight, a pressure that made the air feel heavy. Those standing close to the sword stepped back without thinking. Their instincts told them this was no ordinary moment. Elias kept both hands on the hilt. His knuckles were pale from the force of his grip, but his eyes were calm. He did not yank or twist. He pulled with steady strength. The way a climber pulls out a rope when hanging over a cliff, slow, measured, determined. The cracks in the black stone spread wider. Thin beams of light escaped like streams of water from a dam. The silence inside the temple was so deep it felt alive. Even the crowd seemed frozen. They had been loud a moment ago, gasping at every crack in the stone. Now they were like statues, unmoving, holding their breath. The guardians at the walls stood completely still, their masked faces turned toward the human. The light from the broken stone glowed brighter and brighter, casting long silver shadows across the black floor. Elias's hands were still on the hilt. The sword was almost free. It hung in a strange in-between state, no longer fully bound, yet not ready to rise. He could feel something in the air, a pause, like the world itself was waiting for what he would do next. Then, without warning, the world shifted again. The temple faded. The crowd disappeared. Elias found himself standing on a vast plain of white sand under a silver sky. The air was warm, but the warmth felt wrong, heavy, oppressive. Far ahead, he saw two paths. They began at the same point in front of him but quickly diverged, winding into the distance until they vanished into the horizon. The sword was still in his hands. Its weight had changed, lighter now, but pulsing faintly, the same deep heartbeat he had felt before. It was speaking to him again. The voice was not loud, yet it filled his entire mind. "This is the moment," it said. "The one before all others." Elias looked toward the first path. It was wide, paved with shining black stone. Along the edges stood tall banners, alien symbols glowing in red and gold. At the far end, though blurred by distance, he could see the shape of a great throne. Around it, the silhouettes of countless warriors bowed in silence. The voice spoke again. "This path gives you power," it said. "With the blade, you will rule the stars. Every world will kneel. Every enemy will fall." He turned to the second path. This one was narrow, winding through rough, uneven ground. No banners, no throne. Instead, far in the distance, there was a faint flicker of light. It was small, fragile, as if a single campfire burned in the dark. The voice was quieter now. "This path gives you choice," it said. "You will not rule. You will not command. But you will protect and save and heal. The blade will be yours, but it will cost you glory." Elias stood there. He felt the weight of both visions pressing against him. One offered him everything: fame, power, the ability to change the galaxy through command. The other offered him something quieter, the ability to help without reward, to protect without recognition. And deep down, he knew which one the blade wanted him to choose, not because it was easier, but because it was harder. The voice spoke once more. "I do not choose my wielder. They choose themselves." The visions began to twist. On the path of power, he saw the cost. Worlds burned to ash in his name. Armies marching under a banner that bore the sword's shape. On the path of service, he saw the struggle, battles fought in shadows, victories that would never be recorded in history, sacrifices no one would remember. Elias closed his eyes. He thought of Earth. Not the planet itself, but the people, the small kindnesses, the quiet moments of courage that never made the news. He thought of the faces of those he had promised to protect, and when he opened his eyes, he turned toward the second path. The silver sky shattered. The temple returned in a rush. The crowd was still frozen, but the air had changed warmer now. The blade in his hands felt alive. It no longer resisted him. It no longer tested his strength. It accepted him. The voice came one last time. "Then take me," it said. Elias braced his legs. The hum rose again, not harsh and testing now, but full and steady. The cracks in the black stone exploded outward, shards clattering across the floor. The light blazed so bright the crowd shielded their eyes. And then, with a single smooth pull, the blade of Charon rose free for the first time in nearly 1,000 years. They were not white, but a pale silver, the same silver as the blade. The crowd murmured, some in awe, some in fear. Then the world shifted again. In an instant, Elias was no longer in the temple. The stone floor beneath his boots was gone. The air of Talor vanished. He stood on a barren plain under a black sky filled with strange constellations. In the distance, mountains shaped like jagged claws rose into the darkness, and before him, rows of alien warriors stood, silent, unmoving. Their armor gleaming, a figure stepped forward from the army. Its body was tall and thin, its face hidden beneath a mask shaped like a bird's skull. When it spoke, the voice was not from its mouth. It was the same voice Elias had heard in the void. "Many have stood where you stand," it said. "All have failed." Elias looked around, his hand still gripping the hilt, though here, the blade floated upright in the ground before him. "Why show me this?" he asked. "Because the blade must know you," the voice replied. "It must know your fear, your desire, your truth." The ground beneath Elias cracked. Black smoke rose from the fissures. From the smoke, shapes emerged, figures from his past, the faces of people he had lost, old friends, shipmates, even enemies. They surrounded him, whispering words he could not fully hear. But he could feel the weight of their voices. Doubt, blame, regret. He closed his eyes for a moment. He had been tested before, not by magic swords, but by life, by long nights alone on frozen worlds, by battles where survival was nothing but a coin flip, by the guilt of choices that had no right answer. When he opened his eyes again, the smoke was thicker. The masked figure stepped closer. "You carry pain," it said. "Yes," Elias answered. "And yet you stand." "Yes." Elias said again, his voice firm. "Show me why." Elias tightened his grip on the hilt and pulled. The vision shattered. The temple came rushing back into view. The crowd gasped. The blade had moved higher. The cracks in the black stone spread like lightning. Chunks of the stone fell away. The silver light pouring from the base grew brighter. The hum was now a deep, thrumming pulse. It was no longer just sound, it was rhythm. A heartbeat, the heartbeat of something ancient. Something that had been waiting for centuries. Elias's arms trembled now, not from weakness, but from the sheer force pushing back against him. The blade was not resisting in the way an object resists weight. It was resisting in the way a living thing resists being moved. It was testing him with every pull. It was watching him with every breath. The guardians along the walls leaned forward slightly. For the first time in their lives, they were seeing the impossible. One whispered to another. "He is close," the other answered, "or the blade is warning him." Elias dug his boots into the floor. His breath came slow but deep. Every muscle in his body was engaged, but his mind was calm. The calm of someone who had accepted that the only way forward was through. With a final surge of will, he pulled. Again, the blade shifted another inch upward. The light pouring from the broken stone erupted in a sudden flash. It filled the temple, blinding those closest to it, and then everything went silent. The hum stopped, the air felt still. The blade remained in his hands, not yet free, but no longer fully trapped. It was as if it was waiting for one last decision, one final act that would decide if it truly belonged to him. The moment the blade broke free, the temple shook. It was not the kind of shaking caused by mere weight. It was deeper, as if the stone itself was reacting to something it had waited for too long. Dust fell from the high arches, ancient. Cracks spread along the ceiling, and the golden beam of sunlight pouring down seemed to grow brighter. The hum that had been building through the long struggle became something else now. It was not a test, not a challenge. It was a song, a deep, resonating sound that filled the entire hall. It was as if the blade was singing to the planet, telling it, "I have chosen." Elias stood there, both hands gripping the hilt, the weight of the weapon balanced in his palms. For the first time, it was not heavy, at least not in the way it had been. It was no longer pressing down with resistance. Instead, it felt alive, almost eager. The silver of the blade glowed brighter, spilling light across the floor in living patterns that crawled up the columns and across the walls. The alien symbols carved into the temple blazed to life, glowing with the same silver fire. It was as if the entire building was awakening after centuries of silence. Gasps and cries broke from the crowd. Some stepped back in fear, others fell to one knee without thinking. The guardians, still as statues until this moment, lowered their heads in unison. They had sworn oaths to protect the blade until the one worthy appeared, and now the one stood before them. Outside the temple, the effect spread. In the city of Vathran, people turned as the ground beneath their feet vibrated. The crystal towers caught the same strange silver light, refracting it into the sky on the horizon. Even the mountains seemed to shimmer. Birds and alien beasts fell silent. It was as if the whole world was holding its breath. Elias lifted the blade higher. The light grew so intense it felt like a second sun had ignited inside the temple, and then, with a sound like a great bell tolling across the heavens, a beam of silver shot upward through the open roof. It pierced the violet clouds and kept going, straight into the blackness of space. Everyone who saw it knew it was more than light. It was a signal, a call. To what? No one knew. Elias could feel the blade's presence in his mind. No longer a voice, but a steady, quiet awareness. It was not speaking now, but it was there, watching, waiting, ready. For the first time in his life, he felt something he could not name, not pride, not power. Something larger, as if he was holding not just a weapon, but a promise. The crowd began to move again. Some ran from the hall, afraid of what might come. Others pushed forward, desperate to touch even the hem of his sleeve. Whispers turned to shouts. The blade has chosen. The curse is broken. History has changed. But there were others. In the far shadows of the hall, not all faces were filled with awe. Some were hard, unreadable, calculating. Not everyone wanted the blade to be lifted, and not everyone would accept the human who had done it. Elias lowered the sword slightly, testing its balance. It felt natural in his grip, as if it had been made for him and him alone. The silver fire along the blade's edge still burned, but it no longer hurt to look at. Instead, it pulsed in time with his heartbeat. The connection between them was complete. He didn't know yet what that meant, but he knew one thing. Whatever the blade was meant for, it had only just begun. Far above the planet, the beam of light faded, but something in the darkness had seen it, and something was answering. The aftermath, the beam of silver light had faded, but the memory of it still burned in the minds of everyone who had seen it. Across Talor's skies, the violet clouds shimmered faintly, like the planet itself was remembering the moment the blade of Charon rose from its prison. Inside the temple, the crowd remained in a stunned silence. The air smelled of metal and rain, though no storm had passed. The black stone at the center of the hall now lay shattered into hundreds of pieces, its flawless surface broken forever. At its heart, where the sword had once been trapped, only a small hollow remained, empty now. Empty for the first time in nearly 1,000 years. Elias still held the blade in both hands. The silver light had dimmed to a soft glow, but it still pulsed gently. In rhythm with his own heartbeat, the connection between them was steady, calm. It felt less like holding a weapon and more like carrying a living being, a companion who had finally woken after centuries of sleep. The guardians approached slowly. For the first time since Elias had entered the temple, they removed their masks. Beneath the silver metal were faces weathered by age, skin marked by faint silver lines. a sign of their long bond to the blade's temple. The eldest among them stepped forward. His voice was low, almost reverent. "You have done what no living soul could," he said. "The blade is yours now. But know this, human. The galaxy will not let you keep it without challenge." Elias met the old guardian's gaze. "I didn't come here to take it from anyone," he said quietly, "but it came to me." A ripple of unease passed through the remaining onlookers. They understood the truth in those words. The blade had chosen. And that meant something more dangerous than any alien warlord or ancient prophecy. It meant change. Outside the temple, the city was alive with chaos. Crowds filled the streets, arguing, shouting, some celebrating, others terrified. Merchants closed their stalls. Soldiers gathered in tight formations. Messengers raced to send word to every corner of the planet. And far beyond Talor, out among the stars, the news would travel faster than any ship. The blade of Charon had been lifted, and by a human. In a dark chamber far from the temple, a council of alien leaders gathered around a long table of black glass. They had not stood in the hall to witness the event, but they had felt it, the tremor in the ground, the silver light in the sky. They knew instantly what it meant. One spoke in a voice heavy with concern. "If the blade is in human hands, the balance of power will break." Another leaned forward, eyes narrowed. "Then we will break the human before that happens." Back in the temple, Elias sheathed the sword across his back. The weight was perfect, balanced, as though it had been made for him alone. He turned toward the massive doors. The guardian stepped aside. The crowd parted without a word. I followed him as he walked into the open light of Talor's strange sun. He did not yet know where the path ahead would lead, but he could feel it, somewhere out there. Something had heard the blade's call, and it was coming, far above the planet. Beyond its thin violet atmosphere, in the cold stretch of space, a shadow moved. It was massive, larger than any ship in the known galaxy, and as it drifted closer, its dark hull caught the faint silver reflection of the light still lingering over Talor. Inside, unseen by any on the planet, a deep, ancient voice spoke in the darkness. "The wielder has awakened. The game begins." Elias kept walking, unaware of the eyes that now watched him from across the stars. But the blade in his hands knew. It pulsed once, faint but certain. The next chapter of its story, their story, had already begun.